Hey everybody, this is Jacob Lee. Welcome back to the channel. It is Wednesday morning. We are driving to Penn Hospital again for my treatment. And today, my driver is Pastor Anthony Gammage. There you go. Say hi.
Hey.
All right, so we are taking a little detour. There's been a crazy accident or something, so we're going in a different route. But I thought I'd just use this time to kind of pick Anthony's brain. I don't think he really needs an introduction, since most of you know him, but just wanted to pick his brain, especially during the season that we're going through and what it's like to lead a pretty substantial organization, a church of 500 to 700 people. So let's get started. Anthony, you're 40 years old. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Sorry for blowing your spot.
Man.
You are leading a church, an organization with a budget of over $1 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and 500 to 700 people, in a weekly attendance, let's say. What kind of is there pressure that comes with that? How does that feel for you?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean there is pressure. I mean, even in a pandemic, just wrestling through how to help an organization continue to be an organization. Of course, you've got the idea that pandemics won't stop the Big C church, right? The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But at the same time, there are people who love the church, identify with the church, and we've had to just try to figure out how do we be the particular local church body in a time and place such as this. And so pressure, sure, I think there's pressure, but the pressure just comes from wanting to love people well and point them to Jesus and try to figure out what does it look like to move towards one another when, at least by edict of the government, we can't necessarily do that, at least physically. So, yeah.
Yeah, this morning I was thinking about Paul and his anxiety for the churches, and I imagine that a lot of it had to do with their spiritual state, but they had a lot of physical needs. They had a lot of opposition, just a lot of hard circumstances that they were facing, and I just wondered, maybe we're tasting some of that, just anxiety for the churches that are struggling out there and trying to get by.
Yeah.
So with you're talking about, okay, how do we shepherd and care for the people? We're talking 500 plus people. How do you do that?
Well, I personally don't do that. That's.
You don't call 500 people a week?
No. Zoom meetings. I Zoom them all.
Okay.
Just kidding. What's beautiful about New Life is it's a church that's wired to move towards one another. So I would say immediately, the shepherds of the church, the elders, and the deacons and the home group leaders, they really clicked into action. And we pretty quickly just developed a list of people in the church, members and attenders, and tried to figure out, okay, who's already in natural groups to be cared for, either via home groups or have an elder assigned to them. And those groups have done just an excellent job just being sacrificial and loving each other. The deacons have just been unbelievable with trying to figure out how do we move towards people. And just stories even last night in the session meeting of them wanting to bless certain groups with gifts, just letting them know that, hey, you're not alone and we're here. And so really grateful for that, grateful for the one anothering that we hear. So there's this element of we've tried to be intentional to figure out who connects with who, so that we can show care. At the same time, there's been great challenges, particularly for those who weren't already connected. It's been really hard to figure out how to connect there. So staff is another group of people who's done a wonderful job reaching out to others. They've picked up the phone on the list of people who aren't necessarily connected and done a lot of phone calling. And so we're learning as we go in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And who knows, and it feels like it changes every day. Early on people were eager to connect. Now I feel like there's this malaise that's kind of settling in over people. So it feels like it changes every week, and so it's a challenge for sure.
Almost as soon as the public gathering restrictions were put in place, I think like the very next Sunday we had service online. What was the work to do that like? Because we've never done that before, and I'm bringing this up because the quality of the production has been amazing.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, what was it like scrambling to put that on? What did it come intuitively? Or is there a team that puts that together each week? Because we really appreciate having to get to worship with our church body on Sunday, even if it's virtual.
Yeah, so Tommy is our worship director, and he has just been such a gift because, early on when this thing first broke, he was on staff and, proficient in kind of the digital language and up to date on like audio engineering and knew a little bit or had dabbled in video and editing. And so, and he actually likes it. He likes doing it. And so, really, the fact that it looks so good is him. And then you had somebody like Janae who spent 15 hours one week.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
God's Highway?
Yeah,
that was
God's Highway.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so she took 15 hours of her week and did that mashup. And
wow.
And so, again, it's been the body of Christ that's contributed. I will tell you, that first month, one pastor said, "I'm busier than I've ever been, and it's far less satisfying." And that really is how it felt, because all of a sudden, Pandemic 101 was not a class in seminary. Did you take that at West Bend? I didn't take it.
I missed that one.
Yeah. So in a week, I would call Tommy and I'd be like, are the lights okay in here and whatnot? But, it was me in an empty auditorium trying to figure out how to be a lighting grip and a cameraman. And
that must feel weird.
Well, it's kind of miserable.
What's it like preaching to an empty room?
I hate it. I hate it. I took my daughter into the auditorium the other day. We snuck out and I showed her where I was preaching. There's 2 bright lights and a podium. And she's like, "Well, you turned the lights on in the auditorium, right?" And I said, "No, I can't. It doesn't matter. I can't see out there because of the 2 stage lights." And she's like, "That's depressing." And so it really is. Like every week is depressing, and you don't realize how much you depend on the biofeedback of others.
Yes,
and there's been a couple times where I've been like, "Tommy, can you edit this?" Because when you're looking at people, there's a sensitivity I think you have or awareness of their situations that sometimes you just forget about when you're in a room all by yourself and you've been there for 50 days. So anyway, it's a challenge, but at the same time, what's been cool is it's a joy to give something to where, I've heard so many people say Sunday morning is kind of what sets the rhythm to the week.
Yes.
And it's been an encouragement to see others, and so that's been really fun to listen to and to watch, and we want to continue to be creative to figure out how to do that well. So
well, you guys have been doing a great job. You, Ward, Tim Geiger, those guys who are preaching have done a great job in the midst of preaching to an empty room, feeding us the word. So thank you for the work and the prep you put in. Okay, so we are trying to get through this detour, and there are police cars everywhere, so let's see if we can get to the hospital today. So I'm really glad and relieved to hear that you don't experience all the burden of the church on your shoulders, because you shouldn't. And that you have a great team of elders, lay volunteers, home group leaders, deacons. We have a really, really team-oriented model at our church. But what has this personally been like for you to lead the church through something that's been unknown? Like, was the learning curve just really steep? Did you call anybody, pick anyone's brains?
Yeah.
Like, how do you do something that's just unknown? Like, no one's ever done it. You don't know when it's gonna end. You're just kind of like waiting, like you're just walking blind, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and by the way, the one thing to end on with the Sunday morning, there's a lot of admin stuff that happens too, like Ward Shope and Carrie Silver have been doing a lot, especially in the late
Shout out
stages
to all
here.
you guys.
So just want to give a shout out.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody. So your question is, how do you do it? Early on, there's been two churches that have been really helpful. One was New Life Glenside. We pretty early on connected with one another and said, how are you doing this? And then 7 Mile Road, which is a church very different than our own, but I just love how they're thinking through engaging community and thinking outwardly. And so those brothers and sisters were really helpful, especially in the early going, and reaching out to them again this week going, hey, how are you looking to do this? Other resources like the Gospel Coalition and whatnot have been helpful. They put out helpful little lists like, how do you reopen your church and what does this look like? So it's all of those things have helped, but you're just ready, fire, aim. There's no playbook. There's absolutely zero playbook. So there's a lot of trial and error and evaluation, and crisis as an accelerator is something that I've been hearing, and so something else we're leaning into is just going, okay, Lord, what have you taught us here, or what have you accelerated us into to shepherd better, to build into the church better, to do outreach better. Anyway, so that's been an interesting dance.
Yeah, it feels like the Lord is up to something. I mean, this is just so unprecedented, so global and worldwide, and it poses a lot of limitations on what we can do.
Right.
Does it present any opportunities? One thing I think I noticed was you were giving the stats for one of our Sunday morning services.
Yeah.
And you said we had like 1,100 views or something like that.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute, we don't have 1,100 people at our church.
Right.
So yeah, any thoughts behind that?
Yeah, I mean, so even in those stats, you'll learn, even since I've quoted them, so I still think it was about that high. But first of all, you learn that metrics are fascinating things. So even like every platform measures it differently, and there's disagreement on what your multiplier is that you use when you look at numbers, and do you count 3-second view, 10-second view, 1 minute views. So there's a lot to it, but I will say what I believe it has taught me, and we'll see. There's others that need to be brought along with this too, but the front door of the church is not the front door of the church any longer. The front door of the church is the internet of some sort, be it social media, online platforms. That's not to say, like, I think Hebrews 10 and the way God has built us, we are wired to be in person. I don't know where I'm going.
Just follow the map.
But we're wired to be in person, so that will never go away. But I think this has shown us that we need to really think through digitally how do we engage people, and I think it's forced us to go to places that we're not comfortable with going. Because I will say, with those numbers and anecdotally talking to other people, there are many who do not know Christ, and I could name you 3 people in my own life who have been watching.
Wow.
Who don't know the Lord, but they're like, wow, you said this, let's talk about it.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
I think the opportunity is there. I think we need to figure out how to embrace that and how to be a little bit more uncomfortable. So I don't know.
For someone who's on the fence, I have so many people on my block who's on the fence, like, who've expressed, I want to come visit your church, but they never do.
Right.
That's a less threatening way to be introduced to a church.
Sure.
Just to watch a video. So that's pretty cool. I wonder what else the Lord is up to. He's probably up to 1,000 things at once.
Yeah.
And for us, this was a complete unexpected surprise. It, threw us for a loop, but to the Lord, He's in control, and He's up to something. So
I wonder if we're going to come back more hungry for community. I wonder if it's going to recalibrate our insane busy families, of which we are one. I mean, those are questions we're asking, is what healthy things can we bring out of this? And I hope people are seeing how insane we were before this started. So those are just other things.
And we'll just end with this. How can we as a church pray for our lead pastor?
Boy, good question. You know, I think as a pastor, you can pray for wisdom to know how to shepherd and communicate when I'm not often seeing people, and just having that life on life. Like, preaching is really hard when you don't have those constant touch points with people to see what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
And just wisdom, because hold on, let me see. This way.
This way.
I feel like this is the way I should go. And wisdom just to know how to open things up. The opinions, as you can imagine, are varied. You know, some are like, hey, let's forget what you know, the government might be saying we need to meet. And then others are the other extreme of saying, no, let's wait until December.
Wow, you're dealing with stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's we're not an extreme church by any means, but there are definitely people with opinions on both sides. And, you know, how do you love everyone well? And quite frankly, there's no pandemic or chapter in the Bible about virtual services. And, you know, so it's really hard to figure out what wisdom looks like, and how to love your neighbor and how to love God. And so you can just pray for wisdom, and for just the ability to connect with the flock. For us, I think that's a challenge.
All right, that's great. Well, thanks for letting me pester you with questions. This video went longer than our usual ones just because there's just so much wisdom dripping out of...
Or I'm a big mouth, I think that's it.
We just missed each other. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Anyways, this is Jacob Lee and Anthony Gammage signing out. Peace.
See ya.